Hello, today I'm going to be presenting key ideas around the topic of racial and religious profiling by police in Australia, and whether or not there is a relationship between race, religion, and police profiling. For a start, I will begin by briefly explaining the modern-day Australian police and what its principles are. Modern-day Australian police formed from a lack of protection of land and wealth of certain high-status people. In 1829, the Metropolitan Police Act was passed in England, and this was one of the first times that police officers were to be detached from politics, salaried and supervised. 9 clear principles of policing evolved over time and are still vital to this day. Some of these include prevention, as well as maintaining the respect and approval of the public. In regards to accountability of police in modern times, there has been significant change in police oversight in Australia within the last decade. In Victoria, the creation of the Office of Public Integrity and plans for a new integrated Victorian Integrity and Anti-Corruption Commission will help fight corruption in the police force. This improvement in accountability is due to repeated scandals and ongoing distrust of internal investigations amongst the public. The 2019 to 2021 global pandemic brought about an interesting look into how the police treat different areas of social class. Recently, it has been found that areas of lower socioeconomic status within Victoria are twice as likely to receive a fine due to breaching COVID-19 restrictions. This is relevant due to the fact that many people living in lower socioeconomic areas are oftentimes immigrants or people of colour. In a 500-page report on the government's response, the committee found that the 10 lowest socioeconomic areas had a 0.73% per capita fines compared to 0.36 for those in the highest socioeconomic areas. This likely isn't due to the overoffending of particular areas, and it actually is due to there being a level of over-policing in the lower socioeconomic areas of Victoria. With many people of colour living in these areas, it becomes clear that the police may be unfairly targeting certain groups of people during the pandemic. Although there are protections present in relation to the police and the Indigenous population, this does not account for the still present inconsistencies between the treatment of Indigenous people compared to other races by police. The arrest rate of non-Indigenous people has remained relatively static, as 33 arrests per 1,000 arrestable population since the mid-1990s. When looking at the Indigenous arrest rate, it has tended to increase over time from 186.7 per 1,000 to 229.2 per 1,000 between 1994 and 2003. Even in the mid-1990s, the Indigenous arrest rate was much higher than that of the non-Indigenous. Of most notable difference is that the Indigenous arrest outweighs the non-Indigenous approximately by a factor of 7. The rate of deaths in custody for Indigenous compared to non-Indigenous people is an interesting statistic to look at also. In 1996, the death rate for Indigenous people was 5.65 per 100,000 of the general Indigenous population, compared to 0.3 per 100,000 people for non-Indigenous people. This ratio indicates that in 1996, Indigenous people were 16.5 times more likely to die in custody than in their non-Indigenous counterparts. We will now look at religious profiling in Australia. Since the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, Muslim minorities have faced higher levels of policing and prosecution. The war on terror during the 2000s had a major impact on the way Muslim people were treated by society because of their religion. Australia experienced an upsurge of racially based attacks on Muslims and those of Middle Eastern appearance following 9/11, and it became worse after the Bali bombings in 2002. There also began a shift in language where people who used to be referred to as Asian would now be identified through their religion as Muslim. In late September 2001, the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation and the Australian Federal Police raided approximately 30 homes owned by Muslim people. The media was present, and the justification was that, quote, bin Laden's followers are young Middle Eastern Muslim men, so it is young men of Middle Eastern Muslim background who will be targeted in Sydney. Many Muslim people and people who simply looked Middle Eastern suffered because of the response to the September 11th attacks. There is no doubt within Australia that there is negative reporting by the media on African Australians, and this has a major impact on the whole community of people, as well as the way that police interact with these people. With the widespread harassment and identity checks of African youth in Australia, it is due to institutionalised police racism and prejudice. With African youth in Australia being identified as a quote problem group, the media fuels this fire by publishing articles about gangs and violence perpetrated by African Australians. You are also 25 times more likely to be seriously assaulted by someone born in Australia or New Zealand than someone born in Sudan or Kenya. The actual percentage of African Australians who commit crime is very small, and the police and media targeting is a major issue within Australian society. There is significant disparity in the way police interact with certain groups of people in Australia. There is unfortunately truth to the claims of racial or religious profiling in Australia by our police force, and this truth impacts negatively on many people every day. Thank you for listening.